Hello and welcome to the final session 6 of the Generation to Generation course, where we're going to be looking at Elijah and Elisha. Dave Sanders, writing in his chapter in the book Intergenerate, reflects on a time when he was in Florence looking at Michelangelo's statue of David. And he found himself wondering not just at the marvellous skills that Michelangelo had, but asking himself, who was it who trained him? And then the question again, who was it who trained the person who trained him? And Michelangelo was trained by Bertoldo di Giovanni, who in turn had been trained by the famous artist Donatello. They'd passed their skills down generation to generation. And today's session is looking at that passing on of the baton, passing on experience from Elijah to Elisha. Elijah bursts onto the narrative of 1 Kings in chapter 17, as he has a message for Ahab, saying that Ahab has behaved badly in God's eyes, and therefore there will be no rain or dew. Elijah goes off to the brook at Kerith Ravine and is fed by ravens. But when that dries up, he goes to the Zarephath region, stays with a widow, and miraculously her oil and her flour continue and never run out. And even when her son dies, Elijah is able to bring her back to life. The conflict between God and Ahab comes to a head on Mount Carmel, when the prophets of Baal beg on Baal to burn up their offering, but he doesn't. But when Elijah calls on God, fire comes and burns up the offering. But Elijah then runs. Obviously, the threats of Ahab and Queen Jezebel are too much for him. And eventually he meets with God on a mountaintop, not in the earthquake, not in the wind, not in the fire, but a still small voice. And that voice tells him to go and find a successor. And that successor is Elisha. And so he goes to find Elisha, puts his cloak round Elisha, and Elisha leaves his ploughing and follows Elijah and will become his successor. This is a really good example, as we looked earlier, about Lev Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, because Elijah and Elisha work together, and Elisha learns from Elijah. There's evidence of that in some of the events of Elisha's life once Elijah has been taken to heaven, in the same way that Elijah made the widow's oil and flour not run out. So Elisha also helps a woman in need for her oil to keep replenishing. In the same way that Elijah raised a widow's son, Elisha too raises the son of a woman he's been staying with. Together they have learnt and benefited from each other's experience. Elijah too, I'm sure, benefited from Elisha being there. Even though he continued to pronounce God's judgment on kings, he never again ran away as he had before. As you look through this last session today, I'd encourage you to consider the ways in which different generations that you're involved with and you know can be encouraging to each other. Elijah and Elisha give us a really good example of what can happen when different generations spend time together and learn from each other.